Guys. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lisa Rubio. I'm the VP for the Houston.NET user group. Garo had to be out today, so I'm just going to quickly host the meeting. This is our meeting number 215, our first January meeting of 2021. And we're partnering with the North Houston.NET user group. Normally, our January meeting involves the board elections for the officers, but we decided to go ahead and postpone that until June, until we can meet in person again. We'll look at that again in a few months. So on the agenda, just going to go over some quick announcements. We are giving away prizes today, so if you joined in, great. We're going to give prizes away behind the scenes. And then we'll move on to our speaker and our main event. So hopefully you're connected. You're connected to the wireless, but there's the username and password if you need it. Restrooms are right around the corner, so make yourself at home. And then for snacks, we just stocked up on a ton of snacks. Everything's restocked, so please help yourself. Do not be shy. And we are now a part of the .NET Foundation group for meetups. So you'll be able to find us there. And this is how you can connect with us in social media. So we've got Facebook, LinkedIn, Meetup, all of our past presentations. If you're interested in viewing any of them, they'll all be on YouTube. You can check those out on LinkedIn or Meetup as well. And then here is the info for the North Houston.NET users group. So that way you can connect with them. We're partnering together since we don't have to travel, helps with commute. We can get a bigger group of people together. And then these are some of the companies out there hiring. So, take a look. Connect with any of us if you have any questions. These are some employers that we have worked for. There's a lot of opportunities out there. So let us know if you have any questions, and here are some sites of some resources that you can reach out to. All right, and yeah, we're going to do prize drawing. So I'm glad you made the meeting today. You have a chance to win. We're giving away some cool stuff. You could get a monitor. Also, JetBrains license. Looks like we're giving away a small 3D printer. That's pretty cool. And then an external hard drive. So just for being here, we will go ahead and draw those at random. And we will send you a private message so that way we can get your contact information so we can send that over to you. All right, so we're going to have a talk from Hussain Abbasi on Xamarin.Forms 5. Sounds like there's a lot of new stuff out there for us. So let me go ahead and pass that over to him. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and let him share his presentation.
Oh, hello. I'm not able to see the share button yet, but while you set that up, welcome everyone to a nice Thursday. Yeah, nice Thursday. I don't know about my days anymore, so I have to look at a calendar to see what day it is and what date it is. So in my mind, it's Friday because it's slow. There's no sun. My kids are going crazy like it's Friday night. So to me, it's Friday already, but we'll see. Thank you for joining us today. I see a couple of familiar faces. Hello. Today, let me get this show going. You should be seeing my screen. Someone nod, let me know. Okay, I see a few nods. Okay. So you will see the PowerPoint will try to auto caption and will butcher what I'm trying to say. But just hang with me and see if this thing works any better. I thought I could turn it off somehow. Let me do that. There you go. I was told this will probably be on YouTube. So YouTube has its own auto caption. So I would hate to try to figure out which one to read because it'll be overlapping. So I think it's better like this. My name is Hussain Abbasi. I am a Xamarin developer for a very long time. I've been developing in Xamarin since 2013, before we had Forms officially, and I've been working in it since. I've been working in a lot of enterprise type roles. So I'm currently head of technology at a company in Houston called ChaiOne. You guys, some of you may have heard of that company. We do a lot of mobile apps, and that's kind of what we're known for. So we do way more now, but we started off doing that. So I joined the company not too long ago, about a year ago. But I'm still doing a lot of work in Xamarin. I try to be around a lot of these community events and speaking at them and hosting them and all, which I'll talk to you about it towards the end. So welcome. Today we'll talk about Xamarin.Forms 5. Xamarin.Forms 5 is a little bit special, right? It's a little different than some of the other versions that came before it, mainly because it's going away, right? So you will like it. You will hopefully love some parts of it, and then you would have to kind of replace them with something else in the future. Why is it different? We'll talk about that. But for those of you on the call who may have heard about Xamarin, like all this commotion about what it is, and Microsoft acquired it, whatnot. So I'm just gonna run through really quick on what Xamarin is, and then how does it render its UI, because that's kind of important when I get to Xamarin 5 and when I get to MAUI, right? So what is Xamarin? As most of you know, it's a cross-platform framework to develop mobile applications. It runs on Mono, so it takes your C# code with all the .NET framework power, and then it compiles into assembly language, and it compiles down to native code, so you can run it on iOS and Android. But it actually does more than just iOS and Android, right? So it also does Mac, Watch OS, TV OS, the Android Wear OS. That never really became a thing, but it's there. And then Tizen, right? So if you are a Samsung person like I am, you probably heard of Tizen, but that's the extent of it, right? You probably never spent too much time on it. Maybe you did. But the idea is that you have these platforms that you can extend, and the platforms you can build UIs for with your existing .NET and C# knowledge, right? So you don't have to necessarily go and learn Swift or Objective-C or Java, Kotlin, or for Tizen, C++, I think. So it's great. It's very powerful, right? So does that mean you completely go away from iOS and Android? Not really, right? So if you are building a native Xamarin native application, which means you are building a native application for iOS in Xamarin, you can still use Xcode to do things like storyboards, to maybe do some provisioning if you want to. You can use Visual Studio to do most of it, but you can still use Xcode if you wanted to. You will still follow the design pattern, so you will build your iOS app in MVC. So you'll have view controllers, UI view controllers, table view controllers, just like you would in a native app. But in this case, you are doing it in C#. So you have the C# APIs wrapped in C# that are available to you. And then, of course, you have the whole .NET framework to go along with it, right? So, for example, async, await, and link, and all that good stuff that becomes available. It's not something that you kind of get away with. And that was the initial idea for Xamarin, which was just build these really cool native app, very performant app in iOS and Android, using their technologies, using their platform, but actually writing it in .NET, right? Similarly with Android, you had the same tooling, you had the same idea where you were building your apps maybe in MVP, or building them in MVVM. You can still use any editor essentially to build your UIs, but for that you're not tied to an IDE, so you could do it all in your Visual Studio for Mac, for instance. And again, you get the power of .NET, so you can write the Android code in .NET and build you a Xamarin application. So in around 2013-ish, the team started to see a pattern that what if I just want to make I hate to say this word, but line of business app, right? Which is just a form where you just fill out a form and submit. So they came up with something called Forms, hence the name. And the idea was that they'll have a UI library sit on top of Xamarin iOS and Android, and you create a UI or you build a UI, and then that gets rendered into native based on some parameters, right? So if this is what we looked at before, where you had a shared C#, they're calling it backend, but essentially the platform code. And then you had backend, then you had each platform code. Forms came in and kind of took most of that away from you, right? So instead of doing MVP for Android, MVC in iOS, you just did MVVM like you would have in your WPF app. And then the renders took care of rendering that into native code. So your platform knowledge or your platform dependency shrunk quite a bit. So now you could build a complete end-to-end app without ever having to go into iOS or Android to figure things out. Maybe besides, fonts or images or stuff like this. But the rest you could just do bring over your Silverlight expertise minus the XML, the XAML, or bring in your WPF minus the XAML, right? And I'm saying that because that was a pain point. And then just build really cool apps. So you can imagine that developers went crazy and then they started building all sorts of features and enhancements to this platform to make it as much as easy for folks to get onto. And then when in 2016, when Microsoft acquired Xamarin, they threw a bunch of resources on it to make it super simple. To a point where after a few years of Forms, it became really hard to kind of justify going the other ways. Like, why would you go Xamarin iOS or Android if you had Forms? And the use cases that still existed for that also kind of went away with community jumping in, building plugins, building NuGet libraries, building all these extensions in the IDE, where you really didn't have a good reason to switch over anymore, right? So to give you an example, one of the main reasons a lot of times you had to write your native code was push notifications or background jobs that are running, right? And community jumped in, wrote plugins for handling push notifications. We have a Shiny platform by Alan that takes care of backgrounding, makes it very easy to do backgrounding on apps. So it just made it very easy to use Forms, right? So you could write a single piece of code in XAML using, let's just say, a third-party library. In this case, I'm using a Telerik radio gauge and whatnot, and build an app that looks very close to what it should look like on both. With, of course, keeping your platform, nuances in place. So, for example, the title is centered on iOS, but it's left aligned on Android. The users don't need to learn anything new when they're using your app, right? So they're familiar with all this. So how does this work? So if you can see at the very top, there's a element view called entry, which is in Xamarin.Forms. That entry during runtime gets rendered into each platform. So there's a renderer layer for each platform, and there's a class that you can see called entry renderer for each of the platforms. And then what they do is they translate the entry into the native UI element. So in iOS, it's UI text field. In Android, it's edit text, and in UWP, it's text box. So it worked great because you got native controls with native performance running in your app, right? So every control, they kind of worked their way bottom up, where they looked at what controls were common between the platforms, and then they created an abstraction so you can use those, right? Hence, you don't have a segmented view because it's native to iOS, it doesn't exist in Android. Radio button, it exists in Android, doesn't exist in iOS. In that form, at least visually. Similarly, checkbox, it exists in Android, doesn't exist in Android. So those controls were left out, right? So community jumped in, created controls. I personally have a library that had a checkbox that has all these controls that didn't come out of the box. And then if we wanted to customize the behavior or view on the platforms, we just go down to that custom renderer layer, write our own renderer, right? Extend the base renderer and make the changes we wanted to make. So it was very one-to-one linking between a native control and a Xamarin control. And at some points, the user started saying, why can't we have a control that doesn't exist on either one, right? I mean, the community is building it. Why not just build it into the platform? And I think in 2019, when the checkbox discussion got really heated, and then people actually got excited, and then James worked on it. When that became a thing, then it kind of opened the door to, hey, if we can draw something instead of having a custom control, or instead of having a native control, if we can just draw a control like a checkbox, why can't we do it for other things, right? And that kind of opened the door to this, Xamarin teams embracing this change from developers. And then that kind of opened the door to Xamarin 5.0, to be honest, right? Because now you have controls that don't exist natively, but they work on both platforms because they are built either as a composite or either as a templated view that are working on both. The users get what they want, and they don't have to worry about, well, this doesn't exist on Android, but this does exist on iOS, so should we even do it? All that is like kind of out the window, which makes this 5.0 a very, very like big deal in the Xamarin.Forms world, right? Then we also have shell. I can't see everyone on my screen. Maybe I can, let me see. But if I was to ask you that who all here have heard of shell, if you can raise your hand, I guarantee I'm not gonna see a lot of hands. Yep, I'm not seeing any hands for that matter. which is not a surprise, because shell is something that shell is Shane is gonna kill me. Shell is it's a template. It's a template that you can say, but it's a different way of building your apps, right? So it's kind of a step further from Xamarin.Forms to say all you need to worry about is your controls. I mean, your content, and then the app will take care of controls and navigation and all these things. So it's something that Shane has been working on for a while, making it easy to navigate, so you can get up and running with apps within a matter of seconds, right? So it's been in use. People are using it. Not a lot of people that I know use Shell just yet, because it's going through it's different iterations, but it's something that is good for like quick POCs, to be honest, at this point. So Xamarin.Forms 5.0. So in 5.0, we have a couple of things that are kind of a big deal. First of all, it has a bunch of new controls. Controls that if you are building Xamarin.Forms applications, you have built them or wanted to build one for your app, or tried one and maybe have a janky version of it working in your client app because you really wanted it. Those are available in 5.0, so we'll talk about each one of those. Some of the controls, some of the views that were coming in, and as you can imagine, community got excited. Everybody who had their control somewhere started to polish it, clean it to bring it into this. So they were all behind an experimental flag. So if you wanted to use something like a carousel view, for instance, you had to go into native code and turn on that flag and then use that control. So it was a bit of a still a hack, so to speak. So in 5.0, they said, well, no, if anything that is not fully baked, we will move it out to this other library that is called Xamarin Community Toolkit. And we'll get to that as well. But what we will do is the ones we do have that are not experimental, let's tighten them up. Let's improve the quality, fix more bugs. And the stuff that is deprecated, that no one uses anymore, or some renaming of APIs, for example, the master detail page is now renamed to flyout page, I think. So they did all those cleanup to make sure that 5.0 was going to be the product, right? So this is going to be the Xamarin.Forms version that you want to use if you are using Xamarin. And then again, at the end, this is the last major update before MAUI, because there will still be enhancements until 2022, I believe. But this will be the last Xamarin.Forms version. So if you are building apps today in Xamarin 4 or 3 or 2, like this is a good one to upgrade to or start building your app to while you wait for MAUI to come along. So a few controls that came in that we did not have access to before was brushes. This was a big one. So before, if you wanted to do any sort of gradient or any sorts of like special effect or even shades or shadows, you would have to go into sorry, I have ADD. You would have to go into a native platform on each platform and do your brushes there. But with 5.0, this is part of the cross-platform now, so we can do things with like you're seeing on the screen with solids, with nice shades, with gradients, linear, radial, whatever you want to do. So that's pretty cool. The next one is a carousel view. This was in demand for a very, 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 very long time. And I say that because there is a control called carousel page, right? So a lot of time, including myself, a lot of developers try to embed that page within a page so they can get that nice like onboarding view. But it just didn't work out because it was a page and it was a lot of pain, right? So now it's part of the 5.0 version where you can actually have a carousel view that you can put a bunch of things in a single page and then just kind of scroll through them. But they didn't just throw an indicator at the bottom to say you are in a carousel page, because you may not have carousel page. You may not have one indicator. It may be something like I don't know, like a movie app where you just have a banner that you can slide through. It doesn't necessarily need an indicator. The next one is drag and drop. This actually is cool for two reasons. First, because it's drag and drop, it allows you to drag and drop within a single screen. But it also works in multi-screen or dual screen. So if you have that duo and you have two different apps or two different things open on your device, you can just slide from one screen to another, and it'll just work. So it's pretty cool. A lot of times you will see these kind of apps, like if you look at that sample when someone built a pizza app where you can just drag and drop ingredients, that was pretty cool. So drag and drop is in there. Before 5.0, you would have to write native code to have on touch started, on touch end, and like handle all the dragging and dropping, right? Very painful. So if you remember, I just mentioned for carousel view that they also introduced something called indicator view. So what you see dots at the bottom, that's I believe the templated view as well. So we can have a different UI for these indicators, which is pretty cool. Radio button. This actually had to get rewritten. So at first, radio buttons exist in Android. We all know that Android is, better. They had radio button. You could do whatever you want on radio buttons with that. And then you had iOS that did not have radio buttons quite like this. Of course, they have the table view where you can pick one and all these. So this was initially, I believe, built as a native control for Android and like a custom drawn thing for iOS. And then they say, no, let's redraw this as a templated view. So now you can actually have a radio button like this, and you can apply templates to it to completely make it look different. So it's pretty cool. It was one of the most famous after brushes. And then we have shapes and paths, so which is also cool. So right now, if you wanted to do shapes and paths, for instance, on Android, you would have to have a XML file, or you would have to have a drawable file with the paths in it, and then you'll bring it in, and then it'll do all the drawing. You will have insets, drawables, or layer drawables with all these paths. Well, it's all gone now. You can do that within your cross-platform code and not have to worry about bringing in, doing a lot of native things there. I think this is the last one, which is pretty cool. It's swipe view. So we know this existed in Android, in iOS, because that's very natural to swipe on a list item in a list on an iOS to get options. But on Android, it was kind of weird where you had to press and hold something for like do a long press, and then the option will come up on the navigation bar on top. So they brought it in a way where it's just there for everyone to use, iOS and Android. That's pretty cool. You can add that to your list views. Your list views or view cells to be able to do this. Now, all those nice controls I mentioned, they are available to us right now. And according to the plan, according to the roadmap, Xamarin 5.0 will be supported for a whole cycle, so for a whole 12-month cycle, which means the idea for, and we'll talk about MAUI in a second. Once MAUI goes live, Xamarin.Forms 5 will be there for another year, and then it'll kind of like they'll deprecate the support. Doesn't mean it'll just go away, but there won't be any enhancements done to it. So if you have apps, you will still have those apps, but you will then at that point you will start to think about migrating them over to MAUI, and then there's just a little bit of process. There's some discussion on having some sort of a migration tool that the team can build, so that'll be helpful for people trying to migrate over. So there's a lot of planning going around there, right? So, but I'm mentioning November 2022 is because that's a long time from here. I would say 2 years almost, right, before you stop getting any support. So if you are, one of the biggest questions I hear is, should I even worry about Xamarin.Forms? Should I already start doing MAUI? Well, you can't do MAUI right now. It's not out, right? You can definitely go get the source code, play around with it, but you can't go production just yet. So you have Xamarin 5 today for production. So use Xamarin 5 for as long as you have to, and then worry about migration over to MAUI. Okay, before we get to MAUI, Xamarin Essentials. So you would imagine Microsoft team or the Xamarin team realized that there are so many plugins out there that people use for every single app. For instance, every time I have to build an app for a customer, I'll probably have a list of NuGet packages that I have to bring in, Newtonsoft.json, and a bunch of other ones, right? Something for battery, something for connectivity. I'll probably go James Montemagno's things. I go through his library and bring something on. So the team said, well, how about we kind of consolidate all that into one and support it officially, right, on a Xamarin, on a Microsoft repository. So that's where the essential comes in, right? And I don't have all the features here, but it's actually pretty cool. It gives us a lot of these APIs, makes them available to us right out of the box, right? So we can do things like check battery status, check app themes, maps, push. It doesn't have push notifications yet. It detects shakes, connectivity, compass, like you name it, right? Anything that you would want to get out of your hardware device, they have it. And I'll have a link at the end for the documentation. It's a very, very long, exhaustive kind of list with those things available to us that make it really simple to use Xamarin.Forms without having to bringing in more NuGet packages from third party elsewhere, or having to write that code, ourselves. So it's very cool. Now remember, I said APIs, right? I didn't mention views or UIs or new controls, because that's not what this is. This is more towards your APIs. Xamarin Community Toolkit, on the other hand, is what the controls I was talking about. So Xamarin Community Toolkit was started by a few developers that are now at Microsoft, and it was the same idea. Like a lot of other developers who are building controls and UIs, they had some controls and UIs, and they said, well, how about we make this the unofficial Xamarin.Forms library, but official Microsoft library. So what they did is they took out those experimental controls from Xamarin.Forms and put them in here. So now we get access to if I'm being naive, anything that makes it into Xamarin.Forms will kind of go through Community Toolkit first. Right? It'll be part of this, you can use it, and if it's really good, they may move it. That was before MAUI came along. So Community Toolkit is great. It has a bunch of built-in behaviors, controls, converters, things like a good friend of mine, Dan, had put in a Gravatar image. So it has the Gravatar image, so you can just put in a circle image in there and play with that. I'm working on a control for Toolkit that hopefully I'll have it in soon, which is a segmented control. So this is where now the community is kind of focusing to put the controls they want people to use most. So instead of going to a third party and getting a control, let's say from my NuGet, I'll put my good controls in here so you can just get them from here, right? So this is a great resource for developers who can get controls right out of the actual community initiative right here. So if you want controls that are not in Xamarin.Forms today, you can probably find them here very easily. All right. MAUI. So there you go. Nice animation. So MAUI, what does MAUI stands for? Multi-platform app UI. So where is this coming from, right? Before I get into the specifics. So if you imagine WPF, Silverlight, sure, why not? I mean, it's not there anymore. But all those developers use a flavor of XAML, right? And they're all on .NET framework. But Xamarin was not aligned with that fully, right? It was there. It was using .NET framework, but it wasn't like fully integrated. So starting .NET 6, the team decided that it's a good time to bring in Xamarin as a system.maui change, right, into that namespace. So the Xamarin namespace goes away, it becomes system.maui whatever. And then that UI is now not just mobile, right? So that UI will be available for mobile, desktop, web, embedded, I would suppose. So anywhere where you are running a .NET UI, you can run that, using your Xamarin apps, which is pretty cool, right? So I left this in here to kind of talk about like what are some of the challenges for Xamarin.Forms before I get into it. It might be too long. So if you imagine, I was talking about initially that every control had that one-on-one relationship between their renderers and then all those things. So with Xamarin 5.0, with the new controls that come in that don't rely on a native UI view or control, that's great, right? But for the ones that we did have, there was a whole new kind of a performance initiative a couple of years ago on Android side where they were building fast renderers, which meant instead of having that renderer layer, how about if we just extended the actual control and applied all those settings, the configurations. And that worked for a lot of controls, right? Like they made them faster, so we cut out that one of the layers. But we still had that issue where we had that one-on-one renderer, right? So with MAUI, we kind of get away from that, and we'll see that in a second. The second thing, inconsistent platform APIs. Well, some things are available in iOS and they're not available on Android, right? This API works in this version of Xamarin, but it doesn't work in WPF because they're on different frameworks. XAML variant. So the XAML that's used for in Xamarin is not the same as WPF because it's a different version. So there's another, and it'll still be the same in MAUI too for now. But there's always been this talk that can we kind of merge these two so we only have to know one XAML, it's a pipe dream. MAUI. So in a nutshell, this is what MAUI is, where you have a .NET platform, and on top of that platform, you have the .NET MAUI, which is the UI for that platform. And this will be mobile, desktop, web, whatever. And the beauty of this is that we kind of get away from having to manage multiple projects with multiple dependencies and multiple platform specific integration that we have to worry about, and we'll see that in a second. And this is what is also known as evolution of Xamarin.Forms, right? Sure. So this is how your project will look like in MAUI. Now, if you notice, in your traditional Xamarin platform, your Xamarin solution file, you have 3 projects at least. You have the shared project, you have iOS project, and Android project. And if you're on the Windows side, you'll also get the UWP project, right? And each project is the starter project or the runner project. And they all use the code that's actually in the shared project to run the app. Well, moving over to this is just one project. It's a single project. It has a platforms area, and then you can put in anything there that needs to be different for each platform, which in this example, you're looking at a Bluetooth adapter that is different between 3, but the rest of it will be the same. So now if you have to embed custom fonts, you don't have to go into the assets in the assets folder in Android and then go into your info.plist for iOS to like copy paste your font name to make sure they all match, and make sure that Android has a /# and then the whole thing. All that is taken care of. So all we need to do is come to this one single project, throw in our resources, our fonts, our whatever, and it will take care of the native implementation for that. So multi-targeting means this one single project, when we run it, it will target multiple platforms, Android, iOS, there might be WPF, there might be others, right? And we get support for Visual Studio Code. So if you are someone who use everything on Visual Studio and then Xamarin in Visual Studio, everything else in Visual Studio Code, and then for Xamarin you come in here, it will, do that for you, I guess. And then of course we get the full .NET CLI support with this as well. So to kind of reiterate the rendering picture that I was showing earlier, the way it renders is that we have a button on the top, each platform has its implementation, and then it renders. With MAUI, there's a concept still, it's a concept, of something called slim renderers, which essentially means that we can have any class, any control that we want to call, in this case, MAUI.button, content button, fabulous button, which is from F#, or any other sort of button, as long as they have as long as they are implementing the iButton interface, and we have a handler for that interface, it will just work. So we can put in a different button and we can display it however we want. We can handle however we want on the platforms. And it reduces all that noise of context switching and then jumping through each layer of your platform specific code to go in. So it makes it very slim, very quick, and very easy to manage the implementation and rendering of your controls as well. Okay, availability. So the idea or the initial announcements were that MAUI will be available late 2020, early 2021. I haven't seen anything, but it's probably coming. It is open source. It is sitting in the GitHub repository, so like feel free to play with it. I know it's not. People are saying, "Hey, when can I get my hands on it?" Well, now, honestly, it's in the repository. Go play with it, but it's not available as a template yet, or it's not available as a productized or a boxed product. Sorry, that you can just install and go. Right. So it's still working on that. So if you remember, I said that the 2021 MAUI becomes official, but Xamarin.Forms 5.0 is still there, right? It doesn't get, it doesn't lose its support. It doesn't get deprecated right away. It will be there for another whole year with minor fixes and bugs and enhancements. So we have some time coming up. The good thing is that Microsoft team announced this in, I think in the summer of 20, that this will come out in 21, and you will be like, why would you announce something so prematurely, right? It's like in a year and a half in advance. Well, so that people can come in, comment, fight, and throw different ideas and see what sticks, and then help the team have a product in 21 that actually is what the users are looking for, and not have a cycle of, okay, well, this does have the things Xamarin.Forms does, and then you're taking it away in a year. What are you doing? You're killing me here, right? So that's why they announced it early, so people can get involved and play around with it. What's the next step? If you are like I mentioned earlier, if you are using Xamarin.Forms 4 or earlier, this is a good time for you to kind of plan on upgrades. It's a new year. You probably have customers asking for new features. So just start to plan for upgrade to 5.0. So now you get all these nice controls that you wanted to use but couldn't use, or have maybe not an optimal implementation for them today, that you can use, like swipe view, indicator view, and all that good stuff. Be on the lookout for breaking changes. For instance, if you were using the radio button experimental flag, like I mentioned, it got rewritten. So there are some API changes. So if you are using radio button, make sure you are using the newer version so you don't break anything. Moved controls. If you were using a control like expander control, which was under experiment in Xamarin.Forms 4 something, that has been moved out to community toolkit. So you won't have that under the namespace anymore, right? So you just make sure that you plan for the controls that are moved out. Also, the deprecated controls, those are things, for instance, the UI web view. I believe it was a few major iterations ago when Xamarin Teams dropped the UI web view for the WebKit because that was suggested by iOS that after a certain point your apps will get rejected if you're not using that. But they kept it in there for developers to go back and fix their apps if they are using UI web view and all these things. So then now they moved it. So if you upgrade, that is gone, and if you haven't moved it or migrated, now is the time to do it, right? And then potentially plan for MAUI migrations. So one thing that we hear from the team as well is that with MAUI, you are not getting away from MVVM. You are not getting away from XAML. We can still do XAML. We can still do MVVM. But we can now also do more things, like we can do model view update model, where we are doing state management using different design patterns and different models. If you are developing in other cross-platform technologies, this will be very familiar to that as well, right? Like React Native, Flutter, whatever. So you can do that, and that's a new way of building apps as well, which is pretty cool. So start thinking about migration that may be coming in that you may want to do. Now, I spoke a lot. I didn't show you any code except for that one snippet for XAML, and that's on purpose, right? I did not want to go into code or pull up my IDE and show you what I'm talking about, all these things, because we do have a Xamarin user group in Houston that meets on the last Wednesday of every month. And this month we have, and I'm one of the organizers. So this month we have Shane, who is the gentleman who's working on Xamarin.Forms shell and now working on MAUI. So we have him over, and he's gonna go through 5.0, MAUI, and Q&A. So similar to what we just talked about here, but he will be more like, we'll ask him more technical questions. So show us the code, show us MVU, like show us like what are you talking about, slim renders, so on and so forth. So if you're not part of that group, I encourage you to do so. The link is meetup.com/HoustonXUG. And the next meetup, like I mentioned, is on the 27th, which is this coming Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. or 6 p.m. 6:30 p.m. Yeah, 6:30 p.m. You will see it. It's on the link. So we meet like I mentioned, every last Wednesday. So if you are into mobile development, definitely join. We do talk about other things as well besides Xamarin.Forms. So we do Xamarin Native platforms, React, reactive UI, and all that good stuff. So definitely join us there as well. And here are some of the resources for you guys to play with, right, on your time. I will send you a link to this slide that I'm showing in the chat, so you can get this slide from there and then get the links. But from top to bottom, at the very top is the new MAUI repository on GitHub that you can go and experiment with today. The essential one, the one I mentioned, the essentials, is also there. The Xamarin Community Toolkit, also there. And then if you look at that, give it a read for the community dev blog on Xamarin.Forms 5.0. It has a lot of links, and it has links to a lot of videos talking about MAUI and explaining what MAUI is and all these things. So if you are in mobile development today or want to be tomorrow, that's a great place to be, and great place to start. And then the last one is where you can find samples for each of the things I just showed you and more, right? So if you are building an app, or if you are getting into mobile and you just want to get a sample, a working sample of something, you can go to the samples page, search by samples you're looking for, brushes, radio button, whatnot. You will see an actual working sample of that. You can look at the code, play with it, bring it into your app, play with it, and go from there. That was that. On this page at the bottom, you see you can find me on Twitter at Hussain and Abbasi. I do stream on Twitch, which is Hussain Abbasi without the N in the middle. Don't ask me why. And then I blog on the right side. You see it's intelliab.com and hussainabbasi.com. So if you have any questions here, or if you want to ping me later, the easiest way is just to get on Twitter and then ping me there. And with that, I kept my promise of staying in time, and I will give it back to Lisa. And I'll open it for questions.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Thank you so much, Hussain.
Let me.
Do you guys hear that background? Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. All right, does anyone have any questions on anything?
Sure. Hey, thanks a lot, Hussain. That was really good. I enjoyed that. I have I've actually got them written down here, so I don't want to take up all the question time, but I'll just ask one or two here, and then we'll let someone else get on. I I I looked at the brushes earlier, but before 5 was released, and the brush I was looking for was something I used a lot in WPF was a image brush, and it was totally awesome. You just slam an image into it, you draw a rectangle with that brush, and it's that image, and it was just that great. They didn't have one that when I looked? Is there an image brush now?
I don't see the brush. I think that I'm getting an echo, so maybe on mute. Can you while I talk so that way I don't hear my voice?
Oh, I got you. Let me find my control here. Oh boy, where's my mute? It was right there.
Is it good? Okay, good. Thank you. The only 3 brushes that are in there today is solid, linear, and radial. And I think that's because on the images side, they are doing some other things like circle image, cached image, and other things. But on the brushes side, I've not seen image brush, or actually I've not heard about it outside of one of our meetups a few years ago when someone brought it up that they used it in WPF, and that would have been a nice addition. But I'm not sure if that's something that's in the roadmap, or I've not seen that in any of the discussions on brushes. But this is a great place for, so you see brushes are here. At the bottom, you can always give them a feedback, which essentially is you can actually go to the Xamarin, you can go to the Xamarin repo itself and then ask a question. And then I'm sure there will be like way more helpful answer you can find there than I can give you here. Besides that, I have not heard of ImageBrush being a part of the roadmap or coming in at any time soon, especially now that they have kind of buttoned up 5.0 for all the new features. Anyone else?
Well, I got more questions since nobody asked. I listened to the guy from Prism, Brian Lagunas, a lot, and he has some pretty strong opinions about Prism over Shell, and he has some also some strong opinions about Uno platform over Maui. Have you entered into any of those types of conversations? And yeah, let me see if I can mute myself. Can you mute me again, Lisa?
Okay, so 2 things. Brian is a good friend of mine. I've worked on that platform Prism quite a bit, mostly on the samples and talks like this. I did give a talk in 2019 on one of those things too. So if you notice, I only have 1 slide on Shell, and like I mentioned, not a lot of people are using Shell right now because it's kind of confusing. The way it's messaged is still a bit confusing to, I guess, senior developers. So if senior developers are not embracing it or pushing for it or blogging on it, it's something that may not be a product that's ready to be production, right? So that's why you probably won't hear like a lot of people talking about Shell, especially myself, right? The team itself is very excited about it, but it's not something that I would tell a new developer or any developer to really jump into right now because it's still being worked on. And for the Uno, on the Uno side of things, so Uno is doing a lot of great stuff. right? They've been working on WebAssembly for a while, so they're bringing, .NET code and Xamarin in the browser for a while. It's very good. It's very strong platform. But Uno still uses Xamarin for their mobile rendering at this point, right? So the Uno team is still going to have to go through the pains of dealing with Xamarin to MAUI and all these things. So I don't think that the Uno platform will be Uno platform is promising something now is delivering something now that Microsoft team is promising with MAUI. But for me, it's interesting because like Microsoft will come out and say, hey, we are providing you with this platform, but there's a third party called Uno. It just depends on what people will feel comfortable with, right? So Uno's been around, like I said, not for a very long time, but it's a great team. It's a very good product. But I have not used Uno, and I don't know when MAUI comes out, how far that will go, because there is among senior developers, you'll probably hear from the senior developers more than anyone else that when there's a new product that comes, the product line that will come out from Microsoft, it'll probably have some more work to be done. Whereas these third-party, paid products or like some of these open source products will have like a leg up because they've been doing it for a while. But I think when it becomes production, it'll just come down to preference. I think if you want to use Uno or MAUI, but I do think Uno has the advantage of being in the market years before MAUI is, right? So MAUI is not going to be production level when it comes out. It'll have its cycles to go through, and Uno is already in production, doing things in production. So if someone is looking for that kind of support and they go with Uno, they can't go wrong going with Uno, and then maybe revisiting MAUI when you get to it. But Uno has been working with a lot of these library maintainers, so they've been working with Brian and Dan on getting Prism support, right? And they have that built in. Shell has Prism support too because they were doing good, but then again, Shell is a bit of a complicated toy, in my opinion.
So I have a question. How much cross-pollination are you seeing between the work being done with WinUI 3 and the cross-platform efforts being done there and this?
Honestly, I have not played with WinUI 3 at all. I do follow Morton on his what he's working on for WinUI 3, and it looks really good. But I haven't had a use case personally to work on, or with my clients for the last, I don't know how many years. So I've only been looking at it from like a bystander to see, okay, it looks cool. I'll get to it eventually. But what I would like to see is, because WinUI is still working and there is still demand for it, I would like the Xamarin variant of XAML to come close into what is going on in the .NET world in general. So that way we could reuse, views from WinUI 3 into Xamarin and vice versa, without having to have this discrepancy of, well, you are on a different flavor of XAML. But I think we are quite ways from there at this point.
Okay, yeah, that was the derivative of that question, was how much reusability we'll be able to have.
Yeah, essentially, like if the XAMLs are not playing nice, then it will be interesting. Right now, with MAUI, yeah, it's to be seen. Honestly, it's to be seen, because I don't see. So here's my beef with One UI Everywhere. Okay, if you may. I've yet to see a production level project doing that very successfully. Maybe outside of communication apps, like Slack maybe is a good example, where the UI looks same everywhere, and it's like they're not on .NET, right? They're on Electron or whatever. So I've yet to see an app that says, hey, I want my mobile app, this control to look exactly same on my desktop app where I'm running terminals and where I'm managing these warehouses or whatever the case may be. So the promise is good. I really want to see some good use cases for a holistic approach to UI. But normally when you are dealing with designers, they're not thinking of synergy like, coming from top to bottom. They're looking for experience from bottom up. So they may say, well, your developers are very happy with, reusing this piece of UI everywhere. But guess what? Your users don't care because they are not using both screens at the same time. You will have users who may only be using mobile part of this, and you have users who may only be using desktop part of this. So they don't care if they look the same, right? So I think the use case is very good, but I've yet to see a huge demand for it. So now the subset of that is, well, I don't want to use the whole view, but I just want to make sure that my little controls look the same. So if I have a little widget, I want it to look the same on both sides. But a lot of times when I do see like a hamburger menu on a mobile and then a menu on the left side on a web page, it just looks a little off, right? So
Yeah, I wasn't meaning one UI. I was meaning Win UI because it has a backend that's a lot like Manifold.js, where you can design UIs that sit on top of your code base that are dependent on the platform you're targeting. So it doesn't have to be one UI. I meant Win UI.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I wasn't talking about the one UI. You're right. It used to be a thing, right? The one UI was a thing, but I meant like, a single UI on all platforms. But yeah, I'm actually like I said, I have not done Win UI work. I'm just following it, but I'm interested to see what happens with the XAML story with MAUI. Like, because I would imagine that when MAUI kicks off and people like start getting into this MVU style of programming, like more declarative, like, when they're writing UI as code. I don't know if there will be a use case for having XAML around for that for too long, right? So it's a little bit of a mixed bag for me, and it's just interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years in the XAML space for Xamarin.
Excellent, thank you.
Good question.
Looks like you have a question in the chat. I don't think you already answered this. Have you personally started playing with MAUI yet? If so, how big of a transition do you expect it will be for existing Forms apps?
Okay, Lisa and I are playing the mute game. So I have not played with MAUI more than just a hello world kind of experience, but I have developed. I'm currently working on with two other apps that are in Flutter, and I've gotten very used to writing my UIS code in Flutter and doing state management, and all that stuff. So I'm excited for MAUI to kind of bring my like that experience over to MAUI, so to see how I can translate it. But because, like I mentioned, because we don't have to, like, that's not a requirement for us to go away from XAML-based views and MVVM-based apps. I don't think that there will be a huge transition unless you want to make that transition. So I don't think the team will, like, you would have to drop your XAMLs and your MVVM to use MAUI. Actually, you guys are still seeing my screen. So let me see if I can bring this up. Here. So you see, so we still have MVVM, we still have other things. So this is the new stuff that they are working on, which is the MVU model, which is model view update. So we will still have this. So I don't think folks would have to necessarily transition over, but if you do want to transition over, there will be a little bit of learning curve if you have not been building your UIs in code. So if you are a XAML person who loves to see markup, who loves to see like things structured in front of you, now you have to do that in code. It will be a bit of a transition to get to. Now, I do plan on streaming content on MAUI when it becomes a little bit more mainstream and when I get around to it a little bit more. Right now, it's just changing so much that I'm staying away from it for a second. But I'm following the changes that are coming in, and on the GitHub, all the issues that are coming in. So there is if you remember, I was talking about slim renders. There's actually a spec on that by one of the dev leads on the team here somewhere. So in any case, so I am part of this. I do follow it, but I don't think And that's one of the reasons that when people heard about this, they kind of freaked out because it was a different way of doing it. And then people say, well, does that mean my apps are going to go obsolete? And they say, no, you shouldn't have to worry about things because you will still have your MVVM and your XAML. So long-winded answer to your question, that the transition is there if you really want to do it. But for existing apps, it should be just I think, lift and shift in some cases to migrate over to MVU. You're welcome, absolutely.
This got me thinking to how much of this is them bringing some of the code first paradigms into XAML and not really updating the XAML piece of it. Like, the reason I say this is there's a lot of work that they're doing right now around building UIs automatically with AI and machine learning. And this is all a derivative of having a separation of concern paradigm where the UI is completely markup and can be delivered by ML in the cloud. And because of that, I don't see them getting rid of that separation. I see them bringing in the ability for you to do code first UI, but not getting rid of that ability.
And that's a good point. I don't think so. Microsoft is not, I guess, known for killing off technologies completely. They just kind of abandon it. So even if it comes out that XAML will eventually just be XAML and then they're not going to enhance it, I think what we have today will stick around, so they can do things like you're mentioning, where they can do code generation either through ML or through tools like Infragistics have an app map tool where you are just dragging, dropping things, and it's spitting out a XAML that you can use, right? So they're also, and I would hope that they're also very cognizant of the fact that if they are just willy-nilly dropping support, then all these vendors will have to do things too. And I think if it was up to me, if I'm not going to bring MAUI or unify MAUI into the .NET standard XAML, whatever that is, then I'll leave it alone. Like, why make your vendors go through all that just because, like, for semantics, right?
Exactly.
Unless you are trying to do something really fancy with that XAML. For example, people have been asking for Blend for Xamarin for years, right? But you can't have Blend for Xamarin because that's not the same version of XAML. So if there is a way for us to bring that Windows Phone, WinUI, XAML in for Xamarin and then use Blend for it, I mean, that will be a major win for a lot of these like UIs, because then you can do a lot of these animations, a lot of these transitions in your XAML without having to have a third-party library do it for you.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this was just the code first method is just the first step, because a lot of times code first is the first step because we're all engineers. So
yeah, I mean, we'll see. We never know. We have Aaron that says we have many technologies that are widely used, like WCF, that are in some situation. Yeah, absolutely. So Microsoft, like I said, they may like abandon something that they know it's in use, but not really kill it, because they know people are still using it. They are still taking advantage of it. They just may make it a little bit harder for you to use it or acquire it or install it, or maybe find it to even download it, right? But they won't like kill it, because we still have WinForms, right? We still have people building desktop applications in WinForm, so, which is not a bad thing, I guess, because if you are running so we are in Houston, right? So we have a lot of oil and gas and energy customers who have applications running in ASP 1.0 or AngularJS or Delphi, all these things, right? And they're like, this is my ERP system that my guy made, and don't touch it. So we're not going to go and say, no, rewrite this in the latest,
Well, you also have the situation that we run into at HP, which is that OEMs have a whole plethora of API underneath the operating system that we have to access. And none of that is available through any of the newer frameworks. So you have to use some of the older technology in parity with UWP and such, just to be able to access some of the things like your infrared camera or the sensors, stuff like that.
Absolutely. I'm actually I'm working with a client now where they have a huge part of a section of their business is using a suite of applications from one vendor that are all Microsoft Access applications. And they came to us that we have this data all over the place. We want to unify it. We need a better way to manage it. And when we looked at it, I'm like, well, that's Access, and that's all on-prem the way you have it. And like what? So, and the two applications that are talking to another, they are both Access databases, and they're asking us to make it, a little bit more easy to sync and share information. So I'm like, I can't go in and say rip this whole thing off and put something else, because they just cannot afford to do that right now, right? So sometimes you have these fun projects where you end up working on those, or end up working on VB.NET like I have not too long ago, right? So that's part of being a developer, which is the fun part. Cool.
All right, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Hussain, for the presentation. Great job. Everyone join the Xamarin user group so you can see his presentation next week. Thank you guys so much. If you need to rewatch the presentation, we'll have it posted on YouTube.
Thank you for having me.
Well done.
Have a good day, everyone.
Yep.
Bye.
All done, everyone. Thank you.